The cold came before anything else. Not the sharp bite of it, but the deep, spreading kind, the kind that moves through ruined silk like the asphalt itself is pulling you under. Ada Tanner lay face up in the standing water of a dead-end industrial road off Spur 5 and 27, the port of Houston a smear of distant lights on the horizon, and for a long, terrible moment, she could not remember how to breathe. She remembered the argument. She remembered the BMW's interior, smelling of Creighton's cologne and the scotch he'd been drinking since before the dinner party. She remembered the way his voice had dropped below, shouting into something worse. That cold, clipped register he saved for when he truly meant it. She remembered his right hand leaving the steering wheel. After that, the rain. Her left palm was shredded where it had caught the road. Her cheek pulsed with a heat that meant swelling. The back of her head rang like a struck bell. She pressed both hands flat against the wet ground and tried to push herself upright, and a white-hot bolt of pain through her ribs stopped her completely, left her gasping in the dark. "Get up," she told herself. "You get up right now." She had been telling herself that for 3 years. Creighton Weld was one of Houston's most celebrated men. If you asked anyone at the Greater Houston Partnership or the City Council chambers, they would tell you he was brilliant, self-made, relentlessly charitable. A developer who built not just towers but communities, the kind of man who knew every alderman by first name and every bartender by birthday. He had a face that photographed beautifully and a handshake that made people feel chosen. He had made Ada feel chosen, once. She had been 31 when they met, a forensic accountant at a mid-size firm, the kind of woman who could locate a discrepancy in 11,000 lines of data before her second cup of coffee. She was large. She had always been large, soft in the places the world kept telling her to harden, and she had learned early to lead with her brain because the world would always try to dismiss the rest of her first. Creighton had called her magnificent. He said it like he meant every syllable. The first time he called her a cow, they had been married 14 months. By year 2, she had stopped eating in front of him. By year 3, she had stopped arguing. The woman who could take apart a balance sheet like a surgeon had spent 36 months slowly, forgetting she was worth anything at all. She had flinched away from mirrors. She had worn shapeless clothes to avoid his commentary. She had apologized, reflexively, constantly, for the space her body occupied in rooms he had personally invited her into. And now he had thrown her out of a moving vehicle on a road where no one would find her until morning, and some part of her, the part he'd worked hardest to break, wondered if maybe this was exactly what she deserved. She was still lying in that thought when the headlights appeared. 3 sets of them, not passing, the low controlled purr of high-end engines dropping to idle. Car doors opened in measured sequence like choreography, boots on wet concrete, voices low and clipped. "Something's in the road," male voice terse. "That's a person." A second voice, different in quality, older, quieter, the kind of quiet that took up more space than shouting. "Fin lights." A flashlight beam found her. Ada raised one arm to block it, the motion sending another scream through her side. She heard a sharp intake of breath from whoever was holding the light. "Boss," the first voice again, tighter now. "She's pretty banged up." Footsteps, deliberate, getting closer. Ada squinted against the glare and saw him come into focus one piece at a time. Dark trousers soaked through at the knees where he crouched without hesitation to her level. A charcoal jacket, open at the collar. A face built from hard angles, sharp jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once, eyes set deep and moving over her with rapid, systematic assessment. He wasn't looking at her with horror. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was cataloguing, evaluating, deciding. His eyes met hers. "Can you tell me your name?" His voice was even, like the question was simple, like she was not bleeding in a ditch in the rain, and he was not whoever he clearly was. "Ada," she said. Her own voice surprised her, steadier than she expected. "Ada," he repeated it without inflection. My name is Corvin Drax. I'm going to help you. Can you move at all? She tried to sit up. The ribs stopped her. No. He glanced over his shoulder at the man behind him, Finn, early 30s, with the watchful stillness of someone always 3 seconds from action if necessary. Call Harwick. Tell him we're coming. Then back to her. I'm going to lift you. It's going to hurt. I need you to let it. Ada stopped herself. She had been about to tell him she was too heavy. 3 years of Creighton had made the apology automatic, a reflex like flinching. She swallowed it back down. Okay. Corvin Drax slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, and he rose to his feet without a sound. No grunt of exertion, no shift of balance, no moment of recalculation. He held her against his chest with the matter-of-fact steadiness of a man who understood exactly what he was doing and had no opinion whatsoever about the weight of it, only the business of keeping her safe. Ada's whole body had tensed for the grimace, for the strained breath, for the look she'd trained herself to expect from any man who had to account for her size. It didn't come. She didn't know what to do with its absence. He carried her to the middle vehicle, a black Suburban, armored by the sound of the door, and set her across the back seat with the kind of care that made her throat tighten in ways that had nothing to do with the pain. He settled in beside her, pressing something clean against the cut at her hairline. Stay conscious, he said. Talk to me. What happened? Ada stared at the ceiling. The leather smelled like cedar and something darker underneath. My husband threw me out of the car. A beat of silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind with actual weight. Where were you coming from? A dinner party. She almost laughed and stopped herself because it would have cost her. He's on the city council planning committee. Very important man. I embarrassed him tonight. She paused. I exist in ways he finds inconvenient. Corvin said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, not louder, not different in any identifiable way, but denser. His name. Creighton Weld. The silence that followed that name was a different animal entirely. She woke in a room that smelled like clean linen and antiseptic, which was how she knew she was still alive. The ceiling was high, the walls were a warm grey, the bed was enormous, and the sheets were the kind of thread count that felt like cool water. A man she didn't recognize, older, reading glasses on a hawkish nose, sat near the window with a tablet in his lap. Mrs. Tanner, he closed the tablet. I'm Dr. Harwick. You've been out for just under 18 hours. She processed this slowly. An IV in her left arm, her right hand wrapped in gauze. Her ribs, when she tested a careful breath, registered a manageable complaint instead of the white-hot shriek from the road. Where am I? A private facility. He stood and filled a glass of water from a pitcher. 2 fractured ribs, a significant scalp laceration, grade 2 concussion, and extensive bruising consistent with being struck and with road contact. He handed her the glass and met her eyes over his frames. You're very lucky, Miss Tanner. Before she could ask anything else, the door opened. Corvin Drax looked different in controlled light. He wore a dark charcoal suit today, no tie, perfectly fitted. He was taller than she'd registered in the dark, and there was a quality of stillness about him that made the room feel smaller the moment he entered it. His eyes were not soft grey. They were the grey of storm systems, and they moved over her with the same systematic attention as the night before. Dr. Harwick excused himself with the efficiency of a man practiced at disappearing. Corvin took the empty chair, leaned his forearms on his knees, and put his face roughly 2 feet from hers. It should have felt threatening. It didn't. You said your husband's name last night, he said, and then you passed out. I'd like to finish that conversation. Ada set the glass down. Who are you, actually? I operate transportation, logistics, and commercial real estate in this city. He paused one beat. And other things. Other things. She held his gaze. She had spent 3 years making herself smaller in rooms with powerful men. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was finished with that particular habit. You carry yourself like a man who decides what happens in Houston, not just what happens inside it. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, closer to recognition. Creighton Weld has been a problem for 18 months, he said. He controls which development projects get approved. He's been taking money from a cartel operating through port facilities, approving infrastructure contracts for shell companies that exist solely to move product. Last month, he got greedy, started skimming from the cartel's own construction accounts and covering it with fabricated invoices. They don't know yet. When they find out, they won't be patient. Ada felt something click into place, several small recognitions like tumblers in a lock. The Kavanaugh infrastructure contracts, she said. Corvin's eyes sharpened. You know them. I was a forensic accountant before, she said before with a specific flatness. I noticed discrepancies in Creighton's firm's internal accounts about 8 months ago. Inflated subcontractor costs, invoice dates that didn't align with project timelines, payments to vendors with no digital footprint. I couldn't prove it without the shell company filings, but the pattern was there. She paused. I made the mistake of asking him about it. The silence stretched. Is that why he threw you out of the car? He told me I was imagining things. Then he told me I was stupid, that my weight was affecting my cognition. Ada said it evenly, without performance. The shame she'd carried with those words had somewhere in the last 18 hours gone very quiet. 2 weeks later, I found transfer documents on his desk, moving our joint assets into a holding company I'd never heard of. My signature was on them. I didn't sign them. She met Corvin's eyes directly. I think he was planning to have me committed, discredited, so that when I eventually talked, nobody would believe a hysterical, unstable woman. The dinner party was for the council's planning committee. He's announcing a major redevelopment contract next week. He needed me cooperative for the photographs, and when I wasn't, she stopped, started again. He decided it was time. Corvin Drax was very still. He stood and walked to the window, hands behind his back, and looked at what was outside for a long moment. When he turned back, his expression held something colder and more useful than sympathy. Creighton Weld spent 3 years teaching the most analytically capable person in his orbit to doubt herself, he said, so she wouldn't become his undoing. The grey eyes found hers. He made a significant error. Ada's heart was doing something complicated. What are you proposing? You have the knowledge. I have the resources. He returned to the chair. You know how his money moves. You know his patterns. You can build what I haven't been able to build, a document thread from the shell companies to the cartel accounts, to Weld himself. He let the pause sit. I want him ended. Not quietly. I want him standing in the rubble while this city watches. He paused once more. In exchange, your name cleared, your assets restored, the commitment paperwork destroyed. And no man in this city will ever again have cause to make you feel like a problem to be managed. Ada looked at her wrapped hand. She thought about every mirror she'd avoided for 3 years. She thought about lying on that wet road, wondering if she deserved it. All right, she said, show me what you have. The next 8 days were the most purposeful of Ada Tanner's life. Corvin's compound outside the city was what money looked like when it stopped trying to perform itself. Functional, spare, expensive, in a way that announced nothing. He gave her unrestricted access to his financial analysts, his servers, and a private office with 3 monitors and a coffee machine that delivered results she hadn't thought were achievable outside of a specialty roaster. He also arranged, without commentary, a wardrobe in her size. Real clothing, structured, fitted, cut to acknowledge, rather than apologize for her shape. On the 3rd morning, Ada put on a deep plum wrap dress and stood in front of the room's single full-length mirror for a long time, doing something she hadn't done in years, looking at herself without immediately locating the problem. She had soft arms, a full stomach, hips that required consideration. She was aware, and had been since she was 15, that the world had strong opinions about all of it. She also had, at this precise moment, A complete forensic reconstruction of Creighton Weld's financial crimes spread across 3 monitors in the next room. She straightened her shoulders and went back to work. By day 4, she had found the Kavanaugh thread. The shell companies traced through a Delaware holding structure to 2 dormant LLCs inside Creighton's firm. Dormant for 3 years, suddenly active 18 months ago, receiving and dispersing funds in a rhythm she recognized immediately. She'd seen it before. It was the heartbeat of laundered money. By day 6, she found the commitment order. Buried in files Corvin's team had pulled from the council's internal server, an administrator-level document bearing her name, dated 3 weeks prior, citing delusional disorder and the opinions of 2 psychiatrists Ada had never once met. She sat with that for a while, then she printed it, added it to the file, and kept going. On day 7, Corvin appeared in her office doorway at 11 in the evening. He set a glass of water at the edge of her desk and looked at what was on the screens without speaking. Both psychiatrists took payments from Creighton's firm in the last 6 months, Ada said without turning around. He wasn't going to throw me away. He was going to warehouse me somewhere and then tell the city I'd had a breakdown. No one questions a rich man's troubled wife. Corvin's jaw was very tight. The announcement is Thursday. City Hall atrium. 2 o'clock press conference. He accepts the redevelopment contract in front of cameras, and his next move after that would have been filing the commitment paperwork. Ada turned in her chair. We have 72 hours. He looked at her for a long moment. What do you want to do with them? I want him to lose everything in public, she said. I want the city council watching when the man they're handing $2 billion to gets exposed. I want the cartel to see their own ledgers on a screen in front of reporters. She paused. And I want to be standing there when it happens. Something moved through Corvin's expression that was not quite a smile and was more honest than one. Thursday, then, he said. Let's build you something to walk in wearing. The press conference was held in the glass and marble atrium of Houston City Hall, the kind of civic space designed to make money look like public service. Creighton Weld stood at the podium at 2:15, looking precisely as he always had, composed, gracious, built for the camera. He was shaking the mayor's hand when the atrium doors opened. The room turned. Ada Tanner walked in wearing ivory. The suit was silk, cut to her exact measurements, the jacket structured at the shoulders, and open over a blouse the color of champagne. She wore her hair up and gold earrings she'd bought herself before she'd ever met Creighton. Large, unapologetic earrings that she'd stopped wearing because he'd said they were too much. They caught the atrium light every time she moved. She did not look like a woman who had nearly died on a rain-slicked road 9 days ago. She looked like she had arrived to collect something that was owed to her. Half a step behind and to her right walked Corvin Drax in a black suit, with 4 members of his team flanking them in fitted jackets. Corvin's eyes were already on Creighton. Creighton, behind the podium, had gone the color of old chalk. Gentlemen, Ada's voice carried easily across the atrium. The acoustics were excellent. I apologize for the interruption. I'll only need a few minutes. She removed a wireless drive from the portfolio under her arm. One of Corvin's people walked it to the AV station before the city comms staffer could think to object. What? Creighton's voice cracked. Ada, how did you were? The Kavanaugh infrastructure contracts, Ada said, turning to the assembled press and the rows of council members behind the podium. She kept her voice even and clear, the voice she'd used at depositions, at board meetings, at every professional table she'd ever sat at before she let a man talk her out of knowing what she was worth. Specifically, the shell company structure Creighton Weld's firm has been using to launder cartel funds through the Port of Houston. I've also brought the forged psychiatric commitment order bearing my signature, prepared by my husband to have me institutionalized before I could share what I found. The screen behind the podium lit up. The Delaware structure map, The Kavanaugh payment ledgers with the cartel routing numbers highlighted in red. The commitment order, her name at the top, 2 paid psychiatrists' signatures at the bottom. The atrium detonated. Creighton came around the podium fast, the civic graciousness collapsing all at once, the careful public attaché falling away like something had yanked it from behind. "You stupid delusional," he started. Corvin moved faster. He stepped in front of Ada without haste, one hand flat against Creighton's chest, stopping the man like he'd walked into something immovable. Creighton was not a small person. He stopped completely. Corvin looked at him for a moment with an expression almost entirely without feeling. "That," he said very quietly, so that only Creighton could hear it, "is the last time you speak to her." Creighton's eyes moved from Corvin's face to the men positioned behind him, and whatever he had been about to say dissolved entirely. Ada stepped up beside Corvin. She looked at the man who had spent 3 years trying to teach her she was invisible. He looked small. She was surprised by how small. "I'm not here to have you arrested," she said. "The evidence handles that. I'm not here for revenge, either." She let the quiet hold for a moment. "I'm here because I needed to see your face when you finally understood that the most inconvenient woman in your life was the one who survived." She turned her back on Creighton Weld. Behind her, the scramble of council members distancing themselves from the podium, the rapid-fire shutter of cameras, a reporter already speaking fast into a phone, and then the side doors opening, different people, not press, moving with a different quality of purpose. "Cartel's people just came in through the service entrance," Finn said quietly behind her. They saw the screen. "Let them handle their business," Corvin said. He looked at Ada. "Ready?" Ada looked around the atrium, the screen still displaying the ledgers, the press in controlled chaos, Creighton turning slowly in the center of it, like a man watching his own walls come down. She felt something settle in her chest. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than triumph. She looked down at her hands, soft, full, a faint mark on the left palm where the road had taken something from her 9 days ago. "Yes," she said. Corvin offered his arm. Ada rested her hand on it, and they walked out of City Hall into the Houston afternoon, leaving behind the noise and the cameras and the wreckage of a man who had never understood what he'd been given. Outside, the air smelled like rain building in from the coast. Ada tipped her face toward the sky. She had spent 3 years apologizing for her size, her voice, her intelligence, her existence. She had made herself small in every room she entered and still been told she took up too much space. She had let a man with a talent for cruelty convince her that what she could plainly see with her own eyes was a delusion. None of it had ever been true. Corvin said nothing. He understood. She was coming to realize that some moments didn't require commentary. They reached the car. He held the door. Ada stopped before she got in and turned back to look at the building one last time, its glass facade reflecting the clouds moving in from the east, the sky rearranging itself the way it always did in Houston before a storm rolled through. She had been thrown to the ground and gotten back up. She had been told she was nothing and rebuilt the evidence file anyway. She had walked into a room full of power and not made herself smaller to fit inside it. She got in the car. "Where to?" Corvin asked, settling in beside her, his eyes on her with that same unguarded attention that had been reading her clearly from the very first night. Ada watched the city move past the tinted windows. She had an entire life to reconstruct, her name to recover, her credentials to restore, a future to build from nothing in a city that now knew exactly who she was. She found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was not afraid of a single part of it. "Forward," she said. "Just take me forward." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Ada watched them trace lines down the glass and felt, for the first time in 3 years, entirely and completely like herself.